people be so close.
Now, are you speaking in Mandarin? Yeah, my uncle was in Hong Kong and he went up to Shanghai for like 25 years. Yeah. So he had to learn Cantonese procedure Mandarin. Yeah. Because you can't speak. In Shanghai, they go to little house groups. Yeah. Because you couldn't read as a church. Oh, yeah. He had to learn Mandarin. Yes. Politicians were about 18 years in the Philippines. Eventually got kicked out, I think, for recording Bibles.
Yes, but I used to have
His children are still in Hong Kong. That's all those We were there in 83. Yes. Yes. Shanghai, Beijing, and Canton. And we were in Russia the year before, and it was still USSR. And they will speak to you in like
One of the things it's been really surprising, we said this last night, was this all came together in about less than a week. And without the local group that actually put this together, organizers who want to go unnamed, actually, we couldn't have made this happen. They did it so quickly. And I want to say thank you to them, although they don't want their names mentioned. And we have some special guests in the house today. One is a true patriot. He's probably the reason why, I don't want to say this because maybe he doesn't want me to say this, but he's probably the reason we were able to make this happen. I'd say he's helped organize a lot of what's happening behind the scenes. And I want to, if you can, give a warm welcome to your very own Mayor Bronson.
Thanks, Soccer. Feels like an assembly meeting. I just wanted to say thanks for that intro, Doc. When we heard about this, a local doctor, it turned out it's my personal doctor, and he and his wife don't want their names mentioned, I guess, even though it was on a slide earlier. Came to my staff and said, this group needs to come up here and speak, and for some political reasons, we didn't want my fingerprints all over it, because what we needed doctors who don't agree with this to come and hear this unfiltered by the media, no condemnation, simply get up and hear what we believe is the truth. I think the truth will get us through this. The data will get us to the truth, and that's what we're trying to do is give you the people who understand the data, understand the truth, and get it to healthcare professionals that don't necessarily agree with us. And then from that, then the politicians and the policymakers can get up and make the policy which kind of moves us forward and gets us through this pandemic. And it's a problem. Now, I'm not saying there's no pandemic. There is. We've been here. How we've handled it, I think, history, I think, is going to judge these doctors, these professionals very, very well. And it's going to judge other folks, to include healthcare professionals, quite poorly. I just decided I was going to be on the right side of history on this. And I'm not...
Let's go, Brandon!
You know, and there's some people that are good people that can be wrong on this, and you know, some of them are politicians and some. So I don't think, and some of you may disagree. I don't think there's any evil people involved in this, but I think there's a lot of wrong people involved, and our job is to bring them over to the truth based on the facts in as polite a way as we can. So getting back to that, that's why I don't want my name on it, because I'm looked at as an anti-vax, anti-mask kind of radical. That's the guy I'm supposed to be. I'm not that. I'm not anti-vax. I'm not anti-mask. I'm simply anti-mandates because I think from a political, and historical perspective, once we travel down this, and you're going to hear from Dr. Ann here in a bit, I think again. We had a long talk with her last night. Mandates actually create a very corrosive influence in our society because, and she will tell you, I think, Chinese government treats this is an intentional thing. It's to separate Americans from Americans based on whatever they can find. It creates friction in society, and I'm just trying to reduce that friction and not do mandates and let just people exercise their free will. How we come to that's going to be a political solution. The politicians will hopefully find the best way through that, but we've got to come together. We got to get back to the old normal, not what some people call the new normal. I think the old normal is the best way to come to, but once we get on this mandate path, forget vaccines and masks for a moment, but once we get on the mandate path, we open up a Pandora's box that we're not going to be able to close again, because it conditions us to think that local government officials like mayors can stand up and tell you to put something on your face or something in your arm. I'm a politician, and until a year ago, I never thought I'd ever get in a position to say that. I'm supposed to be out hunting and trapping right now. That's what I do this time of year in my retirement. That kind of ended. I just want to bring us back together to the best way we can and understand that mandates are just not the way to go. They're hurting us. And so we got to come together. I know the assembly meetings get very corrosive. I'm looked at as a guy who's really stirred the pot, and I don't think I have. I may have made a couple mistakes, removing a plexiglass shield or something like that. But that's a different issue. I've stood up twice in front of the assembly and says, folks, do me a favor, calm this down. We need to get through the process. Everybody needs to speak. Because I know these people. They're the same people who lost their jobs, lost their businesses, they lost their homes because they put a mortgage on their home to start their business, and then when they were shut down last year, they lost everything. And now it's starting all over again with mandates, and I hear this every day, all day. It's starting all over again, and the restaurant owners, small business owners are absolutely terrified. And so if I were to order I don't know how I do that, in an assembly meeting or whatever, to order people to not protest or scream or holler, they'll turn on me just like they turn on the assembly. And I just think this tea kettle that's boiling here at a pretty fevered pace, we need to start relieving some of that pressure. And my thing is, and I've told the assembly chair a couple times, I says, just let folks scream, let them holler and vent, because they've lost everything and they're starting to rebuild. Now they think they're going to lose it again, and they could. But all I can do is commit to you, as long as I'm here, we're not doing mandates, and it's just not going to happen. We know it's not the right path forward as far as curing this pandemic. It just isn't. The scientists are telling us just that. And so I'm trying to find a political solution based on the science that's available, the best science, and I'm just here to tell you, after a long dinner and meeting last night with these folks, this is the best science available, and I know the media disparages them. These people have sacrificed a lot. Dr. Yan is here. You'll get introduced, I think, to her later, and literally, we've got a lot of security in this room because the Chinese government is after her. Because of what she's going to tell you today. They don't want her talking. So there's geopolitics in this, there's local politics, there's medicine, there's science, there's everything else. And let's just come to a solution on this and get as many healthcare professionals. And I was going to ask this too, no cameras looking that way, just all of them looking this way. From the back, how many healthcare professionals do we have in this room? It would be really nice. Oh, a lot more than I thought. Oh, okay. This half was supposed to be the healthcare professional side, but then they opened it up to everyone, I guess. And that's really good because it looked to me like about 3/4 of you were healthcare professionals. And that's why I got into more detail, why Dr. Malone would give more detail. The afternoon session, I guess, I'm being told that the afternoon session is a little bit more general and so dumb people like me can understand it. So, anyways, I'm done talking. I'm learning how to be a politician. I like to hear myself talk, so I'll sit down. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Mayor. That the unity is what we're looking for. We're looking to basically create the truth, but also to bring people together, not to divide people. I think the mask mandate is probably the one that's been the most divisive. I got attacked so much about the mask. Early on, I didn't talk about it because it was such a hot topic, hot button. And I sometimes say, I think it's very similar. What the data is very simple. The randomized controlled trials have been done for masks and R99, R100, PAPRs, hazmat suits, those work. Worked in a viral lab myself, and I can tell you that N95, surgical masks and cloth masks don't work. And the studies have been done. 0 randomized controlled trials, 0. And I think there's about 14 that have been done over the last 3 or 4 decades, looking at masks. And these are occupational health people that have this. This is their job. It's not really a physician's job. But working in the lab, we sometimes had to teach young students and stuff the proper techniques and things. So this is not really a physician thing. It's more of an occupational health thing, and those masks don't work for that. And the trials have been done, the studies have been done. They did one last year, the Danish study, to look for SARS-CoV-2, having some help from the mask, and it just didn't work. So I sometimes make the mention of that it's a really big politicized issue, and I kind of go to when I deal with my children, that I cover their feet at night, even though I know there's no ghosts in my house, I still cover their feet because they're scared. And so it protects, it makes people feel good to wear a mask. So I wear it a lot in my office because a lot of people are really, really frightened. And so I think the mayor brings a good point, whether you're vax on vax, mask on mask, there's a bigger initiative going on. As we talked about, it's more than this. It's more. It's not just a virus. This is something more. It's about compliance, control. It's much bigger. Unfortunately, I hate to say this, but it is. I was completely naive in the beginning of this clinic. The beginning of this pandemic. So I have another special guest I want to bring up. He's a constitutional, independent, freedom-loving attorney. He gave a great speech last night. He has a lot to say about how to mobilize and how to organize on the local level, which is why I think one of the meetings we're having here is to put the emphasis on the fact that we've got a global problem, but we've got to solve things locally. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Colton Boyles. Be ready to stand and cheer.
Thank you. I was actually back there working on my PowerPoint presentation. I had no idea I was going to be up here, but it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. My name is Colton Boyles. I hail from Idaho. I'm an attorney. I like to call myself a lawyer, not a lawyer. I was an insurance adjuster before. I've met thousands of people across the nation. I was in an amazing meeting last night with probably one of the best panels I've ever seen address this topic, and it's a very serious topic, just like the mayor said. Mandates are a different beast. They're not recommendations. They're not someone asking you to do something. It's a threat of coercion, and that's a serious crime. Not only could it be a state crime, it could be a federal crime. And then when state officials push this on you under color of law, they could be violating federal law. And if it ends in serious bodily harm or death, it could be a felony. 18 U.S.C. 241 and 242. So I think this is a very serious issue. And what's even scarier to me than that is that the governors are amending state statute by proclamation. In the state of Idaho, Governor Brad Little, in March, at the beginning of the pandemic, almost 600 days ago, amended state statute, purported to amend the state statutes with a proclamation. He said open meetings are no longer open. We're going to have mask mandates and social distancing requirements, and you're not going to be able to hold your public and your elected officials accountable. But in a law-abiding society where it's the rule of law, not the rule of man, when it's about law and not power, that's how you seek a redress of grievance, is you go and you petition your government. That's foundational to our society. So I think it's very interesting that they want to cut that off. They want to cut off that pressure valve of the American people. And what they're doing is they're slowly walking the proverbial America mama bear into the corner. And you're going to back the American mama bear too far into the corner one day. And that American mama bear, metaphysically, is going to take her big paw with her sharp claws and she's going to rip whoever's face off is in front of her. Because our children are on the line, and a legacy of medical our legacy of medical freedom in the United States is being destroyed purposefully in this country. And I'm not going to stand for that, and nor should you. And I'll tell you why. Did you guys know that yesterday the Supreme Court denied a religious exemption to the state vaccine mandates in Maine? While I generally think it's a good idea for the Supreme Court to not get involved at an early stage, it's like a pre-trial on the merits, because we want to develop the factual record and we want to let truth prevail. However, Justice Alito, Justice Gorsuch, and Justice Thomas wrote a dissent, and I think that dissent was incredible. What Justice Gorsuch said in his dissent was that the majority's viewpoint borderlines on irrational. They're categorically denying religious exemptions. I've even had clients come to me and say, my medical employer said you can either file a religious exemption or a medical exemption and not both. Right? That's absurd and that's insane. These are clearly stated, clearly codified statutory and constitutional rights. And for a state official to come at you and try and deprive you of that, you have to presume that's knowing. Because it's their duty to understand and know and read the law. We expect them to. The court does when they pass on statutes. The courts say, we assume the legislature knew what the law was when they amended it. But we can't expect that of our state officers? Why not? President Biden is purporting to use the executive power authority to amend law like the legislature nationwide. Shouldn't we presume that he understands the law? Well, it's codified in the law right now that any emergency use authorized treatment requires informed consent. It's baked into the statutes. And the Pfizer BioNTech is authorized for emergency use only. The FDA's own position says it has 10 ingredients. The Comirnaty, which is authorized, it has a biologics license, a BLA, has 11 ingredients. So how could it be the same thing? What's the other ingredient? Where is it manufactured? I have a sneaking suspicion that this virus was a biological warfare weapon created by China, released in China as a military operation, as an attack on the American people, to split the American people as a part of a 100-year marathon to take over America and have the Chinese People's Liberation Army, the CCP, become the #1 power in the world. And now they're selling masks to us made in China. And now they're selling us a vaccine that I believe is potentially manufactured in China, at least partially. Why are those documents redacted? Where is it made? What are the ingredients? These are basic questions that you as a patient are entitled to know before you make a decision if you want to jam something like that in your body. Now I have a preposition for you. The First Amendment in the United States. It's fundamental. It's foundational. It forms the fabric of an ordered society. And it's required to maintain the republic. And the First Amendment happens in your mind, where you think. The government can't reach that. The government can't tell you what to think. The government can't tell you what to believe. But that assumes you have a healthy body and a healthy mind. That gives you the ability to have the thought and to formulate the thought with proper logic. If you can't control your body, so you have a healthy body and a healthy mind, how do you have a First Amendment? So if the government can tell you what to put in your body, they're presuming the authority to be able to tell you what to think. Because they can put contaminants and toxins in your body that would affect that ability. So when people tell me, they coax this constitutional argument in a way that says, well, you don't have a constitutional right to infect other people with a virus. I say, yeah, you're right, that kind of sounds like that could be terrorism. I agree. No one has a right to purposefully get someone sick with something harmful. That's bioterror, that's biowarfare, that's exactly what's happening to us right now. I agree. But the other side of that preposition is the ability to decide what goes into your temple. The ability to decide when you want to eat and when you don't want to eat. If you want to have a sip of water now or not. What you want to feed your children. Presupposes the First Amendment. It presupposes the free exercise of religion. It's fundamental. It's like the sacraments. There's an old Latin phrase, and it's in English its translation is, how you worship is who you worship. And right now, the government is having one of the most massive overreaches, the most egregious civil rights attacks in the history of the world that I've ever read. They're masking our children. They're interfering with informed consent nationwide. They're allowing big pharma companies to come and restrict alternative treatments. They're interfering with the patient-doctor relationship. And then they're attacking the healthcare providers that are actually being brave and showing courage and standing up and doing something about this. So, folks, we are fighting a war against the legacy of medical freedom for our children. This is even worse than human trafficking or child trafficking. This is a step beyond that. Good news is that in the District of Columbia, a judge issued a minute order in Church versus Biden holding off categorical denials of religious exemptions for military and federal employees. The judge just didn't quite trust that the government was going to not discriminate against people who have submitted a religious exemption. Now think about this. Army regs, federal statutes have natural immunity baked into them. You've gotten COVID and recovered? If anyone wants to volunteer this information, raise your hand if you've gotten COVID and recovered in this room. Super spreaders. Super spreader event. Right? Children are a buffer to this disease. Natural immunity is a buffer to this disease. So we are probably in one of the most protected rooms you could be in. No masking, normalcy, no negativity, no stress, no cascade of an immune response, with a lot of healthy people with natural immunity that probably drink a lot of water and eat pretty well. Now, you might be suffering in your vitamin D right now because you're going into the low vitamin D season, but there will be some doctors that'll get up here and help you how to remedy that. Okay, so natural immunity is baked in. The military is categorically denying that. They're not even checking for it. So you're a soldier, an airman, a corpsman, whatever you are, you go in there and say, I'd like a medical exemption because I'm naturally immune. There's no studies that show people that have gotten COVID and recovered from it and then had the vaccine. There's no study for me. So I don't feel like I have adequate informed consent. Plus, I'm better protected. They don't even care. They don't even check for it. They just railroad by it. Lawlessness, total lawlessness. I have whistleblowers in the JAG program telling me that they have a concerted, knowing effort to categorically deny all religious exemptions. And they go to the commander level and there's no appeal. So these boys and girls inside the wire need to know that us outside the wire have their back. Right now.
Yeah.
It's a shame. I was at Godspeak a couple weeks ago, and a Navy commander of 22 years stood up and made a speech in the church. And he said that he's not going to stand for it, and he's not going to stand for it with his group of 22 years. Men like that should not be getting disciplined. Men like that should be getting promoted. Those are the leaders of this country that won the Revolutionary War and fought with their blood, sweat, and tears and earned this legacy of freedom and liberty in the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it's in that order for a very specific reason. Because if you can't have life, aka you can't control what you put in your body, then you can't have liberty. And if you don't have liberty, then you can't pursue happiness. And right now, our lives, not our pursuit of happiness, not our liberty, our lives are being attacked. More people have died from these mRNA gene therapy injections than every single vaccine ever in the history of the VAERS database combined. But no evidence exists that they're not safe and extremely effective. Manning Johnson, Color, Communism, and Common Sense, said that a communist is not a sentimentalist. He does not grieve over the loss of life and the advancement of communism. Michael Pillsbury in the 100-Year Marathon spoke about a new, concerted, multi-generational effort to undermine the American public and make Chinese the next superpower. In Unrestricted Warfare, written by two CCP colonels in 1999, they spoke about new concept weapons, which is new technology. But another term, the new concept of weapons, which is taking technology and using it in a different way. One of these new concepts of weapons was the manipulation of gene therapy. And they were focused on that in 1999 as a country. So there's a couple things you can do, and I only have a couple minutes left that I'm going to run through practically that really make a big difference, that you can do as sort of an army of pro se, because you guys are way more strong and way more important than lawyers. One is, if you don't have a hospital district statute in Alaska, you need to make one. In Idaho, we can vote like a school board trustees, and we could create our own hospital. And we could do whatever we want. COVID-19 recovery clinics, prophylaxis treatment, aftercare facilities. That's a hedge against these hedge fund-funded nonprofit hospitals. Put one of those in right next to an opportunity zone and restrict that hospital to the 2% of things that hospitals do best. And then let the doctors and the nurses and the nurse practitioners and the DOs and the NDs do everything else, the other 98%, and incentivize that sort of integrative medical approach. You put that in an opportunity zone, and you have that state local funded hospital right there, you will have a worldwide treatment facility center in the fastest growing county in Alaska. Support your doctors in private clinics. Spend your money on concierge care. Pay them for their time, just like you pay a lawyer. Incentivize them to help you solve your problems. Start a local media newspaper. Mail it out. In Idaho, we started something called the People's Pen. We mailed it out to 78,000 people in Kootenai County. And boy, you should see some of the reactions people get when they have an alternative. Because when there's only one slanted version of the media, it's authoritative. But if you give someone an alternative, that starts a thought process they can't take back. Homeschool, it's not as regulated, right? If you guys are worried about government indoctrination camps and masks in schools, well, you have an alternative. You get to direct the care, custody, and education of your children. Exert that authority, put that effort in. Local economies are critical. You have to take your money out and start putting your money where people are going to have your back. And you have to increase the transaction cost for the other side. So if your pharmacy isn't filling your ivermectin prescription, file a complaint. If your doctor's pushing vaccines on you, file a complaint. If someone's interfering with your informed consent, file a complaint. Sometimes you gotta get loud. Remember the old lady that cries at the judge and the judge finally relents and gives her what she wants? There's a deep truth here. So the last thing is positive energy though. We're not gonna win this battle by being negative and reactive, because we'll be in their narrative and we'll be on their battle space. You have to stay on message and answer the question you wish you were asked. And above all, you have to speak truth in love. And if you do that, we have a shot. If we don't, we will be the last generation in the world to attempt to preserve liberty. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here, folks. I hope you had a great day. Thank you.
It always sounds different coming from an attorney. Oh, I've got to get my slides. Meryl, can you hand me that? So we had kind of, I thought it would be, I thought this is not totally a certified, continuing medical education, but I've got a lecture basically here that's kind of in my area of expertise. So I don't know if I even introduced myself, but I'm Dr. Richard Urso. I've been practicing doctor for about 32 years. I've basically I went to the University of Texas Medical School, graduated with honors, AOA. Went on to do 5 more years of training. I ended up as the Chief of Orbital Oncology at MD Anderson Hospital, left that position. I'm now in a practice where we have a huge practice, over 600 employees, 24 locations, surgery center, some buildings. I'm very successful in medicine. And last year when this started, I have a research background. It's been 11 years in a lab, 2 in a biochem, and 9 years in tissue culture lab. And one of the things I did was drug development. And drug development, I was really interested in wound healing because I thought it would probably help come into other areas besides where I was. I thought we could cross specialties, and that always seemed really interesting to me. So I got involved, my research was in inflammation, scarring, and wound healing. And I did some work with tumor viruses. So that was my background. And I was the sole inventor of an FDA now approved drug for wound healing. So I have a pretty good background. And I'm gonna say that when I started this pandemic, as you heard Dr. Farr, it was quite obvious right off the bat that it didn't make sense because they were telling us mass lockdowns, wait for a vaccine. I don't know where the treatment went. It was like there was no treatment. That made no sense right off the bat. So that was striking to me right from the beginning. And I was actually on phone calls with people from other countries with a group of ICU people that I was friendly with my whole career. And as I'd done anterior skull-based surgery, I did a lot of stuff in the hospital. I did fractures. I'd done over 4,000 fracture repairs of the face. So I was constantly used to being in ICUs more than any other ocular person that I've ever known. And we got together, we started looking at this, and it was clear that there was 2 things that were quite clear. Nobody was dying right away. They all seemed to be dying in that 2nd and 3rd week. And 2 main things were there was inflammation and blood clotting. And I felt especially obligated to get involved because I knew I had a tremendous background in inflammation. And I felt like I needed to kind of step up. Once I saw what was happening, I felt like I needed to get involved, and actually that wouldn't be that hard to actually overcome this virus. And I thought it was so weird. They kept saying novel, novel, novel. It was like, it's like it had some ghosts and goblins in there with it or something. Yes, it was an engineered virus. I hope everyone knows now that no one's denying the engineering part of it. It's 40% engineered on the spike. That's quite clear. So does anybody think it's a natural virus? Because if you do, we probably need to start again. Okay. So let me go forward. Let's get some of these slides up. So I started thinking about drug repurposing for a novel disease, and under the backdrop that basically we needed to do something, right? We didn't have treatment's always part of what we do. So to this day, the NIH basically has said there's really no treatment. They have remdesivir. I think they might have the monoclonals. I don't know what clause that's under, but there's no treatment. And now they've taken away aspirin. Did anybody realize they don't take aspirin anymore? You guys know that? So it's for people who don't know, aspirin, if you're 90 years old, you fall, you're at risk for bleeding. So there is some truth to what that statement is. But for most people in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, it's a quite useful drug, and we know there's lots of studies showing that it helps with blood clotting. But that's not what the NIH is saying. They said we shouldn't use aspirin in this disease. I kind of make a joke about it. They tell us don't use steroids outside the hospital, so in the hospital it's safe, and then over here outside the hospital it's not safe. They've done things that don't make sense. So if you have an inflammatory disease, why would you not treat the inflammation? So I was involved, somebody talked about the Senator Johnson. I was involved in the subcommittee meetings with many of the people that you know. And one of the things I kept saying was, why don't we just talk about inflammation? It's steroids. There's all these drugs that we use for inflammation. Let's not start with hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. Let's talk about inflammation. Does anybody here not think we need to treat inflammation as an inpatient? Is it okay to treat as an outpatient? There's a lot of medical professionals here. Does anybody agree that treating inflammation as an outpatient is reasonable? Anybody here? Yeah, it's reasonable. So that was kind of the thing. And then we knew right away, the other thing that was real surprising was that there was a blood clotting disease that was a little unusual for a coronavirus. I've never seen that before. And that was the thing that always, to me, seemed very, very, right off the bat, was something I was like, wow, this is, what is causing the blood clotting? And that stuck with me the entire time. And people are still unraveling all the details on that. But that was a little different. Clearly, the spike is thrombogenic. We know that the vaccine itself causes thrombosis and blood clotting. And so we're seeing that that's the major thing that's actually causing the blood clotting, is the spike itself. That's why when we give it, we're seeing all this pulmonary embolus, we're seeing myocarditis for various reasons. I'll go into a little bit of that in a minute. But basically, those two things, why can we not treat, think of what you're saying. I'm not going to treat inflammation. I'm not going to treat blood clotting as an outpatient. You're all a lot of medical professionals here. How does that make any sense? It doesn't. Forget about it. And then the amazing thing is, there are doctors around the world that can't get their hands on hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, and they are having tremendous success treating the inflammation and treating the blood clotting. One guy, Dr. Shetty from South Africa, who Ryan and I have spoken to, Dr. Malone, he's treated over 6,000 patients with, I don't even know, maybe 2 or 3 deaths in all that time. Sick patients, these are not prophylactic patients, these are patients who got ill. And this is why I would oftentimes say, I don't care if you take away hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, I'll still save people. You still have to try, as a medical professional, to save lives. If people are sick, you treat them. And if you don't, something's wrong with you.
There you go.
With that happy thought when we start. So, can you advance? Okay. So, in my career, Is that the second slide? Sure, okay. So because of what's happened, when early on in the pandemic, we were not having much trouble if we did a multi-drug cocktail. So we did not ivermectin, but hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, a steroid, vitamin D, and aspirin. That was my first patient, March 12th of last year. It was a funny thing because he was coughing really badly, he couldn't breathe, his sats were down in the 70s, and he's a friend of mine from medical school, and I told him, let's take the steroids. And he looked at me and he's like, are you crazy? It's a viral, it's a novel virus. And I said, it's an inflammatory disease. I go, this is something I've seen many times. Cytokine storm is very common after viral disorders. And I'll show you why here in a second. But somehow it just, right off the bat, it didn't seem like any big deal. So the cytokine storm part of that never surprised me from the beginning, all right? Viruses cause inflammation. I oftentimes say, you have a virus, and then you have viral particles. You have cars, you have car parts. The virus is there for a week, and you have viral particles, car parts, in the second week. And what we're trying to treat with that cytokine storm is treat the car parts. So I oftentimes say, we don't need Fauci after the first week. We don't need a virologist. We need a virologist in the first week. Do you want a virologist treating your blood clotting? Does anybody here want a virologist treating their blood clotting? I don't. Does anybody think a virologist is the best for inflammation, infectious disease? They're not. All right? So that people don't die. If somebody wants to talk about this, we can talk about it. But nobody's dying from the virus. They're dying from viral particles causing inflammation and blood clotting. So is that slide still up there? So this is the formula that basically came up after Delta came in June. I've treated over about 1,100 patients. Not quite, but almost. And what I found was the original stuff wasn't working. And it was like the middle of June, and Delta hit in Texas. It was over the top. It was massive amounts of people were getting sick. Much more than it happened with the original Alpha variant. And what we found was we had to go in other directions. And after talking overseas with people, this is the list of medicines that I now use. And this, a concoction of these, you could take any two away and you can pretty much save everybody. I also want to mention that if you do treat patients as an outpatient, it's really important that you watch the carbs, because I've had patients that decided they were going to take a lot of Gatorade because they need the electrolytes. Next thing I know, their sugar's 547, they got an anion gap, and they're really sick. So if you do decide, people are here thinking about treating as an outpatient, you got to be really careful if you're using the oral steroids, because their sugars will go high, especially if they're already diabetic. Most of the sickest patients are almost all not just diabetic, but insulin resistant. Sorry. Thanks, Meryl. So this is a big part of the whole disease treatment, is using steroids. If you want to know the one drug that works the best, it's definitely steroids. Ivermectin works great, but steroids are even better. So you can treat almost all the patients with high-dose steroids. Next slide. Now the slide's missing. I think you got my slides out of order somehow. But anyway, that's just a mention of how I got involved in inflammation, and I just thought it would cross boundaries. And I treated a bunch of diseases that basically, with some of the drugs that I'm about to show. And these are a lot of the drugs that I've used for repurposed reasons. Eplerenone I used for dry eye, spironolactone for bovine gland dysfunction, losartan for fibrosis, dapsone for inflammation, hydroxychloroquine, cyclosporin for graft versus host disease. Back in 1989 I used that. I remember when the patent came out in 1995, they said, we're going to treat dry eye with it. And I said, well, that's not going to work. They've made, I don't know, $40 billion off of that one. Macrolide antibiotics. Do people know that macrolide antibiotics are basically another wonder drug? The reason why we like them so much, does anybody like treat COPD patients? with macrolides at all. They're great in the winter if you have a lot of congestion. You can use. They're very immunomodulatory, as well as being antiviral, antibacterial. So everybody thinks of it as an antibiotic. They're incredibly immunomodulatory, and they have a tremendous effect on inflammation. Fenofibrate is great for tumors. I'll go through it. Cholecalciferol, vitamin D, and then you see the whole list there. Cyproheptadine is probably the one drug that I think made the biggest difference for me. I'll go through it when the Delta variant came out. I think it made the most impact. Besides the things I was talking about before, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, steroids, and the activated cyproheptadine, that made the biggest impact for this Delta variant. And many other people are using this formula I have here. Nerve growth factor, that's the drug that I actually developed, patented, and have a wound healing treatment for, and it's FDA approved. Next slide. Next slide. So as I said, it's a biphasic disease. 5 to 7 days, the virus is there, right? And this is not my data. This data has been done by other people. And after that, it's viral particles. Next slide. Here's an example of a cytokine storm. So I've been dealing with these viruses for my whole career. And what they do is they get on the eye, get a viral conjunctivitis, and it lasts for about 5 to 7 days, and the eye clears, and they look pretty good. And then about day 8, 9, 10, you can see those little those infiltrates. Those are cytokine storm infiltrates in the cornea. That's what they look like. It's called epidemic keratoconjunctivitis. That's a steroid-responsive disease. Literally, that's how we treat it. Been doing that for 30 years, and a lot of respiratory viruses do this. So it was no surprise to see an inflammatory disease, cytokine storm, when SARS-CoV-2 hit. I'd already been watching respiratory virus my whole career, watching a cytokine storm. It seemed like second nature. I was shocked that people were attacking me for using steroids. Next slide. And there's some evidence there where they show that in this study, when they cultured from the virus upper respiratory tract, they didn't find any virus. You can go on. Next slide. So in respiratory specimens, was rarely detectable beyond day 8. So it could happen. 99.9% of the time, they don't exist anymore. The virus is not there. So when you're giving, so let me stop that for a minute. Let's think about that. The virus isn't replicating. Why in God's name would you give remdesivir after day 8? How many people are seeing remdesivir giving at day 15 and 20? That's it? Any of you guys work in the hospital? And you're not seeing it given, you're only seeing it given in the first week? I don't believe that. Remdesivir is being given in my hospitals at day 15 and 20 and later. So I have a funny feeling that's happening here too. I doubt that it's not happening. They're giving remdesivir when it can't possibly work because the virus doesn't replicate. Does everybody know how remdesivir works? It's a nucleoside analog. It's an old cancer drug. Like molnupiravir, old cancer drugs. These are, I say now they're from the trash bin. These are from the 1950s and 60s. And they work by interfering with replication. Does everybody ever see a chemo patient? You always do very short therapy? Because why? You lose your hair, skin, and nails. You don't keep hammering them with chemo. You do intermittent treatments. So these drugs are very, very deadly. They interfere with viruses, they interfere with bacteria, they interfere with cancer cells, they interfere with our cells. That's what they do. That's the design of them. There's nothing special about them. These are old drugs. This is not new research. Merck and the rest of them, they're digging up old stuff from the trash bin, all right? Nobody should be clapping for that. And it's killing patients. They're giving it at the wrong time. So one of the things that really interested me was the blood clotting. And then I got, as Ryan will talk about that a little bit today, Dr. Cole. So I'll talk a little bit about the myocarditis. So what's neat about this about what's happening with SARS-CoV-2 is we're seeing vascular events, seeing myocarditis, and it was really hard to figure out, is it inside out? Is it come from the endothelial side? Or is it coming from the outside in, come from the pericyte side? So endothelial cells actually don't have that many of these 2 receptors, and pericytes do. And I think that's the whole year and a half, what's kind of comes full circle for me, is now that we're seeing the lipid nanoparticles and the vaccine getting through, I think it's an outside-in disease. Right? I think it's the lipid nanoparticles are squeezing through. Right? They squeeze through. Everyone knows lipid nanoparticles go everywhere, right? They're like garlic, right? They go to the brain, bone marrow, or they go to all your reproductive organs. They're very easy to slip through tight junctions. And so there's pretty tight junctions in the heart. And it's interesting, I don't know if there's a role for exercise because most of these happen in young males. They're usually of 15, 16-year-old range. But I think they're slipping through and basically landing on these pericytes, which have a lot of ACE2 receptors, and I think that's the source of what's happening with the vaccines over the actual live virus, because the live virus has a harder time getting through. It's banging against the, it's spiky, it's banging against the endothelium and creating some injury. But I think this is where the source of problems are. We're trying to come up with an animal model to sort of prove that. Ryan and some others, Lee Mang, we'll see what we can do to kind of push that out there. But I think we're pretty confident that's what's happening. Next slide. Yeah, so those are mesenchymal. The pericytes are mesenchymal cell lines, like fibroblasts. So they're responsible for, like fibroblasts, for a lot of fibrosis, a lot of inflammation, and I think that's why I think it makes more sense than endothelial cell dysfunction. One of the things that came up early on, I was pretty big on losartan because it does affect permeability, angiotensin temperature receptor blockers. Not sure, but that's another one of the drugs that early on I was real keen on. They actually wrote a paper in the New England Journal, I think in March, late March. I was using it in early March. I forgot to add that in. That was the 6th drug I had in there. I'm not sure it makes a big difference overall, whether or not these drugs actually have an impact. And again, I was kind of going to the fact I think it's an outside-in disease. It's not coming from the endothelial side. You can go. So the other thing is that inside the blood vessels themselves, we're having these neutrophil extracellular traps. This is important because 2 of the mechanisms that ivermectin have and hydroxychloroquine in common is they will decrease neutrophil extracellular traps. So I think those drugs actually make a difference later on in the disease. If you've seen the studies on ivermectin, it was hard for me to believe. Jean-Jacques Ratcher did the first studies in April. He put those together. I actually was in the White House. I gave it to the chief of staff for Pence. Very nice, nice meeting. And because it wasn't published, they said we can't have the president go out on a limb and talk about ivermectin. This is, like I said, June of 2020. But the neutrophil extracellular traps explain why sometimes late in the disease, I think ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine both work. It's kind of you can see how they form, and you see all the different cytokines that arise that actually create this inflammation, create all the stickiness. So probably the biggest thing that I thought was really great, you heard about hydroxychloroquine today, and one of the things that it does, this is why it's really hard for the viruses to get around, it does this mechanism called endosomal acidification. Endosomal acidification, it works against almost every RNA respiratory virus. So that's why it's such a great drug. And it concentrates, hydroxychloroquine concentrates in the lungs, somewhere between 500 to 700 times higher in the lungs when you first get it. So that's why it has a big impact in this disease early on, because it's preventing viral replication. But I always tell people it has multiple effects. And I tell people that it kind of creates viral particles. So you do get some decrease in the amount of replication of RNA because it affects the RDRP. People are medical. But I tell people it's like makes car parts, but it doesn't make cars. That's why a lot of people who are on hydroxychloroquine always say that it'd be great to design the studies for PCR because they'll detect some particles. So if I was ever going to try to make hydroxychloroquine look bad, I would always look for PCR clearance because it still makes a pretty good amount of particles. That's the way the drug works. It can't stop it at every. It can block a little bit. It decreases replication of the RNA, but it does make some viral assembly of all the proteins. And so you're going to get a positive PCR a lot of times. And you might get sort of, I would often say, kind of a mild illness with it most of the time. And it kind of almost vaccine-like. You'll develop immunity, you'll have mild disease, and I'd say that hydroxychloroquine kills it. I would, sometime one science said last year, it kills an industry better than it kills a virus. So this study was done in March, and people who didn't see it, this is a really well done study from China actually, where they showed not only that it was inhibiting SARS-CoV-2 in vitro, but they actually had a dose optimization, which made it really easy. It's like 400 milligrams a day. Basically, then when they actually went to the real trials, they did the recovery trials. There's 3 major trials, but each of those trials involved giving 2,400 milligrams of hydroxychloroquine. Does everybody know that they kind of overdosed on those trials where they actually said it doesn't work? They basically gave toxic doses, and with toxic doses, you're going to get toxic results. So most of the studies, the few studies that showed a lot of toxicity from hydroxychloroquine, the recovery trial was the main one, and they gave 2,400 milligrams. It's a really toxic dose. I've been using this drug for 30 years. I repurposed it for a dry eye myself. And I've never seen that dose used. It's never been used in any disease in all time. It's toxic at that dose. So I want to say that, I want to go back to that because this is the intent is to destroy the drug. And I hate to say it, that's just what it is. There was no reason, no smart person would ever give 2,400 milligrams low. It doesn't make any sense. It literally doesn't make sense. But like I said, if I don't have this drug, I can still cure with others. And that's another study by Fantini. He showed a lot of really neat structural modeling things, that it is blocking the ACE2 from getting to the to its attachment. I mean, it's blocking the virus from getting its attachment to the ACE2 receptor. And one of the things I was saying, I think it would make a lot of sense. There's a study here, low dose hydroxychloroquine, 200 milligrams a day, has all these wonderful effects downstream, particularly on blood clotting. So I think it would make a lot of sense to be able to use that, but good luck trying to do that in the hospital. It will never happen. It also is effective, as I said, in neutrophil extracellular traps, another important part of the pathology that's going on in the disease, causing pulmonary embolus and other issues. So, get around to ivermectin. You heard about that from Meryl today. This is another drug that I had used for viral disease, actually. I didn't recognize all of its immune-mediated properties, really till this year, I'd say. But I knew it had effects on bacteria for lipopolysaccharide. Downstream lipopolysaccharide changes through NF-kappa beta would be basically deregulated, but I didn't realize it would have such an impact on viral disease. But I've used this a lot for people I would put people on Valtrex, and I put them on ivermectin for about a couple of weeks after they got shingles or they got Bell's palsy. So it's a long time I've been using it, and I was real excited when I saw this, but there was just no reason for me to think that this drug would maybe be better than hydroxychloroquine early on. And we started a chat group in April when this happened, and that chat group involved Jean-Jacques Ratcher, who was instrumental in doing the first major studies here in the United States. And he kept pushing me, telling me the results. You know, he had 40% less death in the ICU. And I just couldn't come up with a reason why it was working so well later downstream. Well, it turns out there's like 20 mechanisms. Next slide.
Richard.
Yeah. 3 minutes, okay. I'm excited about Lee Ming's slide. So that's the clinical review for people in the room that are medical people that basically is going to talk about this and show you that this is actually really effective on many levels. It works on vascular disease for this disease, and it works on the inflammatory side also. And you see that it affects transcription factor kappa beta. It does a lot of downstream anti-inflammatory effects. Next. And it also has CD147. This is basically another mechanism that prevents the drug from vascular occlusions. And it actually has an interesting effect on neutrophil extracellular traps through PTEN demethylation. So there's a lot of things that we're really putting together the more we look at this drug that has so many other wonderful effects. And it has effects on myeloperoxidase. So there's a lot of reasons why we might use ivermectin. And let me see, next slide. So I'm gonna just kind of wrap this up a little bit. There's a whole host of drugs. Azithromycin is another one that's amazing. And then you have all the mast cell degranulation by stabilizing that with the H1 blockers, the H2 blockers, glucotriene receptor analogs, Singulair. All these drugs have made a big impact as we got into the Delta variant. And because basically we were stabilizing the inflammatory side of it. The biggest one I think was the ciprofloxacin, because ciprofloxacin actually not only is an H1 blocker, but has a powerful impact on serotonin. So if you haven't used it and you're using patients, I would definitely put that to use. It's made a big difference. I have a lot of people that have used it, and they basically said it helps the headaches, has big impacts on the outcomes. I mean, a lot of the results I think were actually attributable to that. That's the biggest thing I found besides the other drugs that we've already talked about. I haven't gone to using high-dose ivermectin. I just been keeping it at 0.2 milligrams per kilogram for those who are here that are medical. Vitamin D is another one I have on my slide. Every patient gets loaded at the beginning with 40,000 to 50,000 units of vitamin D for 4 days. The studies have been done on this. There's a major trial showing that this decreases all the inflammatory cytokines later on down with the load. So it's a big impactor for anybody here in Alaska. Vitamin D is actually, when I pick my top 3 drugs for this, my top 3 vitamins for this, I just say vitamin D, and vitamin D. So the other one is you want to know about is dutasteride, the anabolic, the androgenic blockers. And we got this a lot from the data out of Brazil. Those guys have really helped us a lot. They're getting attacked. One of the guys who actually did the study is held up for crimes against humanity. Right now, he's got accused of crimes against humanity. So I kind of want to finish with that. This is a doctor trying to help people. He found this drug dutasteride being very helpful because it blocks something called TMP-RSS2. Maybe Ryan can talk about that, but you have to bind to the ACE2 receptor, and then there's a serine protease that actually assists the binding into the cell of the virus. And this dutasteride blocks that, and it's up to a 70% decrease in viral replication with that drug. And so it's another thing as we keep working at it. Doctors in practice are going to find ways to help patients. And I find it just very alarming that we're being crimes against humanity and put up and maybe lose our board certifications for trying to help people. And that's one of the reasons why early on we've been fighting the whole time on that level. And of course now we have the vaccine. So one of the things we have to do is basically allow people to get treated, right? We shouldn't have doctors being, accused of crimes against humanity for trying to help. And that's been one of the major things. I got brought before my board early on last March. But guess what? I had a lot of connections that helped me, thank God. There was a lot of people I knew in our local Texas Senate, and they went to bat for me and helped me to get through that. So if I didn't have any support, I wouldn't be standing here right now. I wouldn't be here. So our local legislators, all these people matter. And it's real important, like, I know the doctors and nurses, they're all here. I can tell you these drugs work, but you have a lot of data, a lot of science as you go forward. We always treat. You're treating inflammation, you're treating blood clotting. There's nothing that you should be doing except treating patients. You should never ignore patients. It is a crime against humanity to let patients suffer at home. I consider it a crime against humanity to let patients suffer at home. That's what we're doing. So, let's see, next, we're going to have a superstar from Idaho come up. He's become a great friend. He has so much insight into pretty much this whole disease from a pathophysiologic side point of view. He's got a lot to offer about how to not only look at this disease, look at the vaccine, see what the vaccine's doing, but also how to help you with things that you can do at home that will help you get better resistance and get a better ability to fight this disease. So I want you to all please give a warm welcome to Dr. Ryan Cole.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I always say I'm an Alaska soul living a lower 48 existence. So my soul is always at peace when I get to come up here to your beautiful state. I have a wife that doesn't like the cold. And so that and 6 daughters. I know the male to female ratio is good up here for the girls, but they say the odds are good, but the goods are odd. So I don't know if that's true or not. By introduction, yes, I'm a practicing pathologist, board certified anatomic clinical pathology, subspecialty training in dermatopathology as well, PhD research in immunology, trained at the Mayo Clinic, was chief fellow at the Mayo Clinic, chief fellow at Columbia in my fellowship. So I've done a little bit in my career. I've seen over 500,000 patients in my career diagnostically. This year I've done over 150,000 COVID tests in my lab. Run a full service laboratory, do anything from biopsies to molecular to every part of the human body, every juice from the human body. So that's what we do in the lab, diagnose. So hopefully I have a few insights that are helpful for you. I'm gonna roll forward there, please. I'll kind of give you this in the back there, so don't keep on saying next. Okay, we'll go back one, because I like this one. No way. Yeah, I know. Okay, so a few things that I'm going to share here today. This is the challenge of sharing information during this past year, because we keep on getting censored, canceled. This isn't misinformation or disinformation, it's information. Read into it, the papers and whatnot that I'll cite. Okay, next. All right, general pattern. If everybody is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. Okay? Science isn't done by consensus. Science is done by looking, by researching, by questioning, by finding. That's how we do science. Okay? And I'm not going to fault, people. Never ascribe to malice that which can be explained by ignorance. Okay? And sometimes it's a willful ignorance in this past year because there's fear involved. Next, please. All right. Dr. Malone covered this, the Global COVID Summit. He read this from Rome, and 100 million people streamed it, the Rome Summit. Next, please. Okay, a little blue there. Go back, please, one. globalcovidsummit.org. Please write that down. I'm going to pause on this slide for a second. globalcovidsummit.org. This is our declaration to the world. This is our 1776 moment as physicians and clinicians and healthcare providers. We got together and we declared our freedom. And in the interest of time, and also go to Doctors and Scientists Declaration.org, and that's where the whole document and our newest update that Dr. Malone already hit the highlights. Look, don't vaccinate the children, recognize natural immunity, let doctors be doctors, let them treat their patients. That's our emphasis, that is our clarion call, that is our Paul Revere. We are lighting the lights in the steeple. And this is medicine and we're taking it back. And there are almost 13,000 of us that have signed this now and declared this. What does that mean? That means there are more doctors that ascribe to what we're doing than work at the CDC, or work at the FDA, or work at the NIH, or work at the WHO. We are the doctors of the world, here to help the patient in our sacred relationship and our Hippocratic oath. Next, please. Okay, I'm just going to have you kind of scroll through these. These are, please read these. Please go to those websites, read the whole declaration. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read them all. Okay, next. We're going to go through a couple here, probably 6, 7 slides. One more. All right, and then that's the updated one. We're going to scroll through that. That's the one I just mentioned. Next. And again. All right, here we are. War of words. This is what we're living this year. A war of words, disinformation, misinformation, consensus, guidelines, propaganda, conspiracy. You're anti-this. I've never been anti-anything in my life. I'm pro-good science. Okay? So to label you demeans you and takes away, your credibility. Like, oh, never mind that he's trained at Mayo and seen 500,000 patients. If we label him, what he says doesn't matter. So we're experiencing this censoring, this canceling. What we're missing in medicine is dialogue. For years, we'd go to grand rounds. We'd discuss a complex patient. We would say, hey, what do you think? What do you think? Hey, I have this paper, I have this paper. We're solving on behalf of a patient, okay? Was Galileo wrong? The earth is not the center of the universe, he said. Boom, you're in the tower. And that's what we're experiencing this year. Do you accomplish medicine that way? Do you accomplish science that way? Absolutely not. That's insanity. Something's gravely wrong when we allow this to keep happening, and we lose our collegiality as medical professionals. How do we solve a problem for the patient when that's what's going on? It's time for us, 1776, to declare freedom from this insanity and speak up and work with each other and work on behalf of the patient. Next, please. Ad hominem versus ad rem. Don't attack the person, attack the issue. But at least allow the issue to be heard. You can attack me all you want, water off a duck's back. I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's to save lives. And I hope you're in it with me. Next, please. Again, war of words. Emotion and belief will blind you. Put on your Captain Spock. I'm a Myers-Briggs INTP. Live long and prosper. Use logic. And let's apply logic to things. It's okay to be emotional. I know we all get riled up. But we got to look at the science. And if you censor the science, you can't save a life. Fear is the real pandemic. Okay? This is a manageable disease. Under age 60 with no comorbidities, the survival is almost 100%. You had early treatment, the survival is 100%. Now, if you have comorbidities under age 50, the survival is still 99.98%. You add in early treatment, the survival is about 100%. So what are we missing here? The fact that everybody under those age groups do fantastically. The older you get, whether it's vaccine injury causing death or whether it's the virus causing death, the older you get, the higher the death rates, yes. But it's still 95, 96% survivable above age 80. Okay? Next. This is the picture of the year. It was at a meeting in Hawaii, in Maui. And this is why we're doing this. Little 4-year-old holding a sign, fear is the real pandemic. What are we doing to that generation by refusing to use science to save lives? Next, please. The virus is not political. It's not blue, it's not red, it's not purple. It's a humanitarian issue. Let's be human with each other again, okay? Yeah, I know we get emotional, but let's talk to each other. Physician to physician, nurse to nurse, doctor to nurse, nurse to doctor, patient to doctor, doctor to patient. It's a humanitarian issue. Let's bring back the core of who we are as a people. Next, please. All right, the government treats us all like a 3-year-old with a hammer. Okay? This is not a one-size-fits-all situation. This is age stratified. Why are we attacking children with an experimental shot when they survive the virus at 100%? Their survival rate is essentially statistically 100%. Dr. Macrolide out of Johns Hopkins looked at every child death this last year and a half, and you know what he found? One death that didn't have a severely underlying condition. You know, be it chemo, leukemia, you know, severe diabetes, genetic disorders, etc. Not everything's a nail. Don't let medical technocrats direct what we're doing. We have agencies and people in agencies that haven't treated a patient in 40 years telling you what to do. Meanwhile, people are on the front lines who treat patients on the daily and save lives on the daily. Yes, we need to protect the elderly and the immune suppressed and those with underlying conditions, but no, we don't lock down and quarantine the well. That's called house arrest. That's imprisonment, like's happening in Australia. We don't let that happen in America. This is our 1776 moment. Next, please. Medical tyranny, maybe. Maybe just medical ignorance. Maybe financial interests. Hard to say. Guideline groups are financially bought, regulatory captured. Most of the money that goes into the CDC, NIH, and FDA comes from pharma. Would that explain what's going on this year? Oh yeah. The journals have been hijacked. Good luck if you have good science getting it published if you don't have a payola going to one of the journal editors, or you don't have big funding coming from pharma. So you would be shocked once you find what's allowed to be printed in the medical literature if you actually want to know science and truth. They've censored our voices. Public health. All right, I'm a public health official now. That's what you do when you see what's going on in government and you don't like what's going on, you get involved. So I was appointed to my Central District Health Board. I'm the physician on Central District Health. I'm one of the world's worst doctors and scientists now, just like Dr. Malone, because I stood up for health and freedom and science. They're trying to take my license away as well. Idaho Medical Association, because I am speaking truth, and I've actually used that evil drug Ivermectin to save lives, filed a complaint against me. Not one single patient complained against me. Political complaints. Is that right? No. Okay, next please. All right, what do we get wrong and what are we doing wrong? Okay, I'm gonna go through these real quick. There's no outpatient treatment for SARS-CoV-2. Lie. Masks stop the spread. No. Schools should be closed. Absolutely not. Look at Scandinavia. They kept their schools open during the whole pandemic. How many deaths did they have age 0 to 18? Zero. Children are a bridge to herd immunity. Vaccines will stop the spread. How are we doing on that right now? Leaky vaccines. 76% of deaths in Illinois last month in the vaccinated. 76% of deaths in Vermont last month, vaccinated. 85% of deaths in Israel, double vaccinated. 65 to 80% of deaths in the UK, vaccinated. How's the vaccine doing? Lockdowns work. Nowhere in the world have they worked, okay? The virus will find a way, the virus will spread, okay? And everyone is at equal risk. No, they're not. Next, please. Public health. Do we trust our public health agencies now? Yes or no? Why not? Yeah, they keep lying to us, like the ones I just put up. I would invoke the public health officials to do things that earn the trust of the people. How many of these messages have you heard? Take your vitamin D. If you're overweight, cut your weight. What about if you have diabetes and a bad diet and you eat processed food and sugar and high fructose corn syrup, which decreases your vitamin D, by the way? Why don't you stop doing those? Get your sleep. Fantastic for your immune system. Exercise, move your body. Were those the public health messages we heard? Shut up, put a mask on, go home, walk down. That's not public health. Next, please. All right, vitamin D. I've been asked to talk about this. Every cell in your body has a D receptor on it on the nucleus. It is not a vitamin, it's a prohormone that controls about 5% of the protein production in your body, directly or indirectly talks to 2,000 genes in your body. It is the key to your immune health. Okay? If one has a vitamin D level above 50, you essentially cannot develop a cytokine storm. Okay? Next, please. All right. UVB light. It's the angle of the sun on the earth that allows UVB to come through the atmosphere. And if you're in the wrong time of year, you don't get any, okay? Above the 35th parallel. Are we above the 35th parallel at the moment in Alaska? You bet we are. Okay, I have Idaho and I didn't put Alaska on that one, sorry. Grab my slide. Next, please. You can run outside naked for essentially the next 4 to 5 months here in Alaska, and you will synthesize this much vitamin D. Every Alaskan right now, until March, is immune suppressed if you don't increase your vitamin D. Okay? How much? At least 5,000 a day. A lot of people up here probably need 10,000 a day. The best thing to do is check your level. Okay? Simple blood test. Next, please. Now, if you do take your vitamin D at nighttime, make sure you take magnesium, magnesium citrate, threonate, malate, anything that ends in H. Just remember, I ate magnesium. If you take magnesium oxide, you're going to get the runs. Vitamin K2 as well will help keep your calcium in balance. False dichotomy this year. All you hear in the news, there's the vaxxed and the unvaxxed. No, there's this third magical category of people called the COVID recovered. We saw the hands earlier. That's good news, okay? And guess what? You get the golden ticket to the kingdom. And I'll go over in a second here. You know, I've had all my colleagues, Ryan will cover that, Ryan will cover that, Ryan. I hope I have time to cover all that. Anyway, the important thing is you're immune, okay? Next, please. All right, 3 critical lab measurements that were mentioned earlier. If you're vitamin D deficient, your chance of hospitalization goes up considerably. So 80% of hospitalized patients are D deficient, 96% of ICU patients in a couple studies are vitamin D deficient. Do you have the message about vitamin D? Anybody? You get that point? All right. Okay. This is an interesting one. I would encourage the healthcare professionals in this room to consider it. In August, a paper came out, 35,000 patient study. There are those of us in this room, and we don't know who we are. You hear this healthy, strapping male or female that's in the hospital and they die from COVID. You're like, whoa, it can happen to anybody. And so they kind of use that as a fear factor. But if you measured this, type 1 interferon, you have an antibody attacking your own interferon, and this chemical is critically important in your viral response. The virus itself already hijacks your interferon. Ivermectin magically actually bumps your interferon up. That's another reason it's such a phenomenal anti-inflammatory medication. So this is something we should be checking in every hospitalized patient: the vitamin D level, the presence or absence of an anti-interferon antibody, and then number 3, IgA deficiency. So IgA is, you hear about antibodies all the time in the news. IgA is a type of antibody you have in your tears, in your snot, in your throat, and it's cranked out. And you have these broad, non-specific ones that fight off all viruses. If you're COVID recovered, and this is the difference between you and the vaccinated, you have IgA that will bind and block anytime you get exposed to COVID again. The vaccinated don't. So why are the vaccinated carrying equal or higher viral loads in their sinuses? Because after a vaccine, you don't form high levels of IgA, anti-SARS antibodies. And that's important. Okay, so these are 3 important lab factors we need to be considering. Next, please. All right, yes, you can culture the virus. I want to get through some of the mess next. I'm just going to kind of flip through these. The virus has been cultured. Next. Okay, so people that say, oh, you can't culture the virus, I'm like, well, then you can't make the argument that ivermectin works because we cultured it to show that it inhibited growth of virus in cultures, okay? You can culture the virus. Okay, next, please. Testing, I'm going to kind of skip through this. Next, I'm going to pause on one. Okay, yeah, you don't want to break the cribriform plate. Make sure you're using proper technique. And why do you go kind of under the middle turbinate bone? That's where your concentration of ACE2 and TMPRSS2 receptors are, okay? One reason children do so fantastically is until puberty, they really don't have a high concentration of TMPRSS2 receptors. And the virus has to bind to both TMPRSS2 and ACE2 in order to get into the cell. So that's just another of the many reasons children do well. In addition to their innate immune system, they have more natural killer cells than adults, 3 times the granzyme activity of our adult killer cells. So children are these wonderful immune machines that are far different than you and I in this room. So to punish them for a virus that doesn't affect them equally and treating them as the same nail with the same hammer is wrong. Medically and scientifically wrong. Okay, next please. Here's your cars and car parts. Really, you're testing for the code of the blueprint of the car with the PCR testing. We're looking for the blueprint. Okay, next. Reverse, and this just very complex lab diagram. Next. Cycle threshold. I want to go into this next, please. Here's where we've been using PCR wrong. Okay, and this is a complaint I hear, and it's a valid complaint. We have a case demic. I can put a probe in you, pull out some cells and DNA in just about anybody in this room, and you have mono, you have strep, you have fungi, etc. I can detect it with a very sensitive test. It doesn't mean you're a case of that disease. It just means you're carrying that organism. Well, PCR is so sensitive, you may be carrying, there may be 200 of us with a particle or 2 of SARS-CoV-2 in our nose right now. I could detect a couple of them. Does it mean you're ill with SARS-CoV-2? No. So really sequential testing with PCR is more important. So if you come in and your cycle is 34, meaning very little virus, and 5 days later you're down at 15, you're going into disease. Now I have a frame reference. You come in symptomatic at 15 and 5 days later you're at 34, you're going out of disease. You come in and you're 34, like Dr. Urso said, you're just carrying a particle. You're through the disease. We're not treating you for virus anymore. Okay? So I think that's kind of a frame shift or a paradigm shift in terms of how we use testing. Next, please. The antigen test, you're actually looking at the car parts now. These are the proteins, okay? So these rapid antigen tests you can buy over the counter now. There's some good ones, there's some bad ones. But, really, if you're going to test and you have symptoms, you may not be symptomatic, or you may not detect day 1, 2, or 3. It just depends on the amount of protein detectable and the range of these tests. So the antigen tests are looking at the car parts, not the blueprint. Okay, next, please. Next, these are just the little flow tests. Antibody testing, this is important. Everybody's worried about, I'll get to this later. Antibodies. We're going to talk a lot about antibodies. Next, please. If you don't have antibodies, there's a good test, the T-detect test, to see if your T cells remember the virus. It's important. Those who are COVID recovered in SARS-CoV-1, 18 years later, those who are infected still have T cell memory to SARS-CoV-1. So when they tell you, oh gosh, you've had COVID, you better get a shot, hogwash. You have immune memory. If you're an immune competent individual, in order to maintain an immune response, you have to have normal vitamin D levels. Do they tell you that? They don't. I'm telling you that. You see all these elderly patients when they're supposedly get infected again. Any vaccine that you get, if you want to maintain an antibody, like Hep B in the hospital, some people don't form a good Hep B response, so they need to get a shot again. Guess what? You need to have a normal vitamin D level for your immune cells to talk to each other. Okay, next, please. Easy test, proprietary test down in Seattle. It's kind of expensive, but if you thought you had COVID and you're not showing antibodies, because your levels always go down on antibodies, do a T-detect test. Okay, next, please. We're on to the Delta variant. Obviously, we've gone through many iterations of this virus. It's not the same virus. It behaves differently. I'm going to show you why real quick. Next. Okay, it spreads faster than the other variants that we have. All are at risk. Vaccinated and unvaccinated are equal opportunity infectees of this variant of the virus, okay? Why is that? Because the virus has escaped the vaccine, the shapes. Your symptoms start sooner with Delta, okay? You want to treat sooner. Symptoms are slightly different with this variant. We don't have quite as much loss of taste and smell. We do have more common cold symptoms with Delta. So a lot of people are like, oh, I just feel like I have a cold. Yeah, you might as well get tested, okay? Because the earlier you treat, the better you do, the better your outcome. Next, please. All right, lots of mutations in Delta, and the Delta Plus, the Delta 4 Plus, the Delta 20 Plus, the new A4 variant, etc. This virus will continue to evolve, okay? And because it's evolving, you know, the vaccine is no longer going to do what it was supposed to do. Next, please. 10% of the alpha variant bound to your cell could get into your cell. 75% of delta bound to your cells can get into your cells. That's why you get sicker faster. That's why you have viral loads. That's why this virus seems like a wildfire now, because it is. You're experiencing higher viral loads with delta. Greater infectivity, greater transmissibility. That's good news and that's bad news. Good news is we're going to be closer to herd immunity a whole lot faster. Bad news, a lot of people still are going to get sick. But what can we do? The vaccinated and the unvaccinated are going to get sick. As Dr. Urso showed you, there are many early treatments to save lives. Next, please. Okay, where are all the autopsies? How are we studying this disease? Next, please. Funding, where's all the NIH funding to understand this, quote, novel virus that we've never seen before? You would think we would want a clear scientific understanding. Next, please. One cannot find that for which they do not look, okay? If we are not looking, we will not learn. There are so few people allowing even post-vaccine death autopsies, post-COVID death autopsies. How do we understand a disease if we're not looking for all the mechanisms of it? This is a really befuddling question. It's a conundrum. I don't know. And again, it goes to who's running the show? And why are they doing what they're doing, whoever they are? But this is a fundamental question in science. This goes back to basic science. Are we doing science? Next, please. Where the same question. Where are the post-vaccine autopsies? Next. The spike is a toxin. We know this. Okay? We, as Dr. Malone says, look, in all deference to those who are trying to do the right thing, well, let's make a vaccine quickly, right? Not knowing that we chose the part of this virus that's actually the disease-inducing part. The spike induces the same disease in the vaccinated as the disease itself, because the spike is the toxin. The spike causes all the problems. It circulates for up to 2 weeks, a Harvard study says, but guess what? In the Journal of Immunology, just a week and a half ago, there was an article about the spike circulating in exosomes inside your body for 4 months. So you hear, oh gosh, the patient died, it couldn't have been the vaccine. Well, if the spike is inducing disease, why couldn't it have been the vaccine if it's still circulating in your body, causing clotting, causing all sorts of inflammatory processes in the brain, in the lungs, in the vessels, etc. Okay, next please. Here, this is from the Salk Institute. On the left, nice clean lines. On the right, blasted apart endothelial cells, caused by the spike only. They injected the spike only without the virus into this model, into this mouse model. And so the spike caused that blowing apart of the vessels. Next, please. Inflammation in the lungs. Lung left, normal. Lung right, spike. Next, please. I think you're going to see a pattern here. Heart. See all those blue dots? They don't belong there. Those dark blue ones? That's inflammation in the heart. Spike only. See the blue? That's early scarring. There's no such thing as mild myocarditis. There's no such thing. So they're like, oh yeah, the young kids, they'll get myocarditis, they'll be fine. Hogwash. 6 months of drugs to prevent congestive heart failure, 18 months of no activity, 50% chance of death after myocarditis at the 11-year point. No such thing as mild myocarditis, and we want to put this in our children? Good idea? Can you answer that one? Rhetorical? Okay, next please. Inflammation in the liver, next. Ovary, we know the lipid nanoparticles concentrate in the ovaries, in the spleen, in the liver, in the brain. What are we doing to the fertility of the next generation? Don't have the answer, because we don't have the advantage of time yet. We can't advance the clock. And they say, well, you know, the only way we're going to know is we just start sticking in kids. Let's just do it anyway. Really? Somebody called Dr. Mengele for me. Seriously. We're going to allow society to repeat what Nazi Germany did? That's not good science. That's experimentation on humanity. That's against every oath I took as a physician to protect and save life. And I hope my colleagues will look at it that same way. Because there are early treatments for this disease. And they work in kids too. My HR manager at work, her little 6-year-old just got COVID. She had some early treatment at home. Guess what? He was out raking leaves 24 hours later because he felt like $1 million. Number one, he's a kid, has a great immune system. Number two, the early treatments tune the virus down like that. And early treatment saves lives. Next, please. Vaccine safety. Next. All right. I think many of you have seen this. So all vaccines combined on average, all vaccines, the whole schedule of vaccines for kids, for adults, you will see maybe 150 deaths per year on average over the last 30 years. Total, 150. This is in the last 9 months with these shots. 837,000 plus adverse reactions, 17,000 deaths, 80 plus thousand hospitalizations, 94,000 urgent care visits, 130,000 post-vaccine doctor visits, 10,000 plus cases of myocarditis, and we continue with this. Is this not a menace? Scientific menace to our bodies that we're allowing this to happen when there are early treatments that save lives? Again, rhetorical question you can answer for yourself. Next. Here's when those deaths occur. You can see the majority of them happen in those first couple of days, and then they taper off. The top line there, that's the average deaths over 30 years, and then you can see this year. That should make you pause and question at least a little bit. Next, please. Screen before vaccine. If you have COVID, you do not need a vaccine. It messes up your immunity. Any doctor that tells you you need a shot after recovering from COVID does not know Immunology 101. If you've had chickenpox, I'm not getting you a chickenpox vaccine. If you've had measles, I'm not getting you a measles vaccine. If you've had hepatitis A, I'm not giving you a hepatitis A vaccine. You are immune. God gave you an immune system to work, and guess what? It works. Next, please. Immune modulations post-shot. Now, this is fascinating. Next, please. All right, with the Pfizer, Dr. Fawcett et al. And colleagues, the Pfizer vaccine induces complex functional reprogramming of innate immune responses, which should be considered in the development and use of this new class of vaccines. What does that mean? Next, please. You have important receptors on your cells, your toll-like receptors. These are pattern receptors. And when your toll-like receptors are altered, it alters communication to your T cells. Well, we found after Pfizer in these studies that it dropped the levels of these. What do these do? These keep other viruses in check. So after the shots, after Moderna, there's tons of shingles. An awakening of herpes, type 1, type 2, mononucleosis is a herpes family virus, odd rashes in the skin caused by herpes 6 and 7. The shots are altering your innate immune system. For how long? Now, if somebody has a broad natural immunity, Why do you want to tinker with them with a shot and put them into this pattern? You're detrimentally affecting that broad immune response. Next, please. The concerning thing, too, is I had toll-like receptor 3 and 4 on there. Guess what those two do? They keep cancer in check. It's odd that I'm getting calls from doctors and oncologists and radiologists seeing really simple cancers that they've managed for years taking off like wildfires. That's part of the mechanism right there. A couple of papers here. Antigenic sin. This is a really good one to read. Eugibius on Substack. This article, if you can read this article, we're programming the immune system for one type of SARS-CoV-2, and as it evolves and we keep boosting the wrong protein, you can't vaccinate against coronaviruses. This is what we've known forever, okay? We've known this in SARS-CoV-1 because the spike changes. It drifts. There is a reason 40 years later we don't have an HIV vaccine, okay? And that's because in this family of viruses, the mutation is always happening consistently and constantly in that spike. The more we vaccinated, we have accelerated the rate of mutation. Just like Dr. Malone was saying, we've accelerated it. It doesn't make any sense what we're doing, and we've known historically this family of viruses always escapes immunity. And when you vaccinate it against it, it also causes what's called antibody-dependent enhancement reaction. You get an antibody that at first, yay, we're making an antibody, look, we're immune. Well, then the virus mutates. Now your antibody's your enemy, not your friend. Read the history of the dengue vaccine in the Philippines. That's a really good story. But it's a really bad story because a lot more children died and are now primed with the bad antibody and are more prone to hospitalization and death the rest of their lives in the Philippines. Took vaccine confidency from the high 80s down to the 20% amongst the moms in the Philippines because they did a bad thing with the vaccine. Their intention was good, but history is a fantastic teacher if you're willing to look at history. Next, please. All right. COVID vaccines will keep you from acquiring full immunity even if you're infected and recovered. So out of the UK database, if you want real data during this pandemic, don't look to our CDC, it's a jumbled mess. Go to the UK, go to Israel, go to Iceland. In the UK, just this last week in their variant reports and whatnot, they're like, hey, guess what? If you've had the vaccine, you don't form a really good antibody against the nucleocapsid. That's what wraps the RNA. Again, I'm not anti-vaccine. I've had all my vaccines, my childhood vaccines, so have my kids. I haven't had this one. I'm not getting this one. And if you have, I hope I'm wrong on half of this stuff. I really do. But science says otherwise. I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm pro-good science. We've rushed science this year. Normally, a vaccine takes 7 to 10 years to get to market for a reason. Next, please. Next. This is fascinating and also a little concerning. So the spike, the S2, the S1, the S2 binds to a receptor called protein P53. It's the guardian of the genome. And when you have dysregulation of P53, you activate cancer genes. This is concerning as well. Again, scientifically, if we were doing good science and developing something properly, these are all the things that would be done in the animal models. The people were the animal this year when the virus came out. They didn't do animal trials before rolling this out on all of us. These aren't approved. The one that's approved isn't available in the United States. Comirnaty. The other three are still experimental. I don't know how you mandate something experimental for which a side effect is death. Just consider that for a minute, if we're allowing our politicians to mandate things. Okay, next, please. Next. These are just other pathways that are mutated. Next. Next. All right, if you decide you're going to get a shot, if you want to prove injury or not, here's a few simple things you can do. Next, please. We know that the shots can cause clotting, microclotting. How do we measure that in the lab? So if someone, put a gun to my head, which is essentially what they're doing with your job and coercion, and it's not scientifically, morally, or ethically the right thing to do. But if you want to know if you're getting injured before or after the shot, get these measured. Do a D-dimer, that shows if you're clotting. Do a sedimentation rate. Do a C-reactive protein. Do a troponin, that tells heart damage. Get your basic blood count. Get your metabolic panel. Then wait a week or 2 weeks after the shot and see what those do. And physiologically and pathophysiologically what's happening inside the human body. If you want evidence against your employer, I would do this. Because they're the ones that should be liable for mandating you to do something that's an experiment on humanity to maintain your gainful employment. That's coercion. That's not science. Next slide, please. Where'd the flu go? Next. Secret lives of viruses. Okay, they have social lives. They talk to each other. Normally in the lab, you study one organism in the petri dish or the tube, but they actually send signals to each other. Next. So here's all the viruses hanging out at the bar, all the different mutated types. They actually send signals. So basically, COVID backbenched influenza this year. So it wasn't like a conspiracy or anything like that. It actually suppressed it. And it's a peptide signal. It's the social arbitrium, that's what it's called. This is a new science the last couple of years. And actually, the pandemic in 2009, it was a common cold virus that stopped the flu pandemic that year. So it's viruses talking to each other, and you have on and off genes in these viruses. They say it's my turn this year and your turn that year. 50 years of viral tracking from Northern Europe and the Western world shows strong cold season, strong flu season, strong flu season, strong cold season. And you can watch them alternate. So, conspiracy theory there. No, the flu was still here, but in smaller numbers. Next, please. And next. All right, I talked about enhancement. Next. Here's just some studies that talk about it, about enhancement. And it basically, if you have a bad antibody, the virus can Trojan horse into your cells, overtake some of your immune cells, copy at higher rate, because you have the wrong antibody to the wrong virus, which always happens with coronaviruses historically. Now you have a problem. Early treatment is for everybody, especially in the vaccinated that have a bad antibody and are going to have higher viral loads faster. You need treatment even faster. It's a good idea to have it on hand. Next, please. Again, another article. Risk for mass vaccination. We knew this going into it. We knew this. The scientists of the NIH knew this. There was a lot of money behind what they were doing. I'm not going to make any suppositions. I'll let you ponder that. Next, please. All right. A vaccine mimics natural infection. A vaccine is a small portion of a natural infection. So here's again scientific nonsense. Get your vaccine, it's better than a natural infection. A vaccine mimics a small part of that whole natural infection. If you've had the natural infection, you have a broader, more durable, long-lasting immunity. Duh. Next. Next. Dr. Bhattacharya and Dr. Ish, to vaccinate the COVID recovered is scientifically incoherent. Next, please. Okay, we talked about IgA in your tears, critically important. COVID recovered have these, vaccinated don't. Your patients that aren't doing well, check them for IgA deficiency anyway. Next, please. Next, please. It's just showing that, look, if you've had viruses, you have immunity, long-lasting. Next. All right, think of the virus as a bicycle. Front tire is the spike. You get a vaccine, you get some antibodies against that front tire. You get an infection, you have antibodies against the handlebars, the frame, the seat, the post, the cranks, the pedals, the chain, the back tire, the spokes, the cables, the grips, the handles, everything. 28 proteins plus one, the spike. Next, please. All right, now the bike gets in a crash, a la Delta front wheel. Now your delta front wheel, now your antibodies don't attach to that new bend shape too well, do they? And guess what? If you had a vaccine, you don't have antibodies against the rest of that bike, and now you have even fewer against that front tire. And they bind, but they really don't neutralize it. But if you had COVID, you remember the whole bicycle. All 28 other proteins, plus one. And if the delta, or if the spike mutates a little and becomes mu or lambda, you still remember the other 28 proteins. That's immunology 101, okay? So if you're COVID recovered, the mutations don't matter so much. Maybe you get a little sniffle if you get a little viral load, but your IgA antibodies are going to mop it like that. And your T cells. Next, please. Antibodies go down. Don't panic. People come to the lab, hey, what's my level? I don't worry about your level. I worry about whether you had them at all, because they're always going to go down. If not, you would look like the swollen, Stay Puft Marshmallow Man of lymph nodes all the time, and your blood would sludge. Because you're exposed to pathogens all day long of all sorts, and your body couldn't do that. It's energetically impossible. Don't worry about your antibody level. Just worry about whether you had them at some point. Keep your vitamin D level up. You'll always have the memory cells in your lymph nodes into your bone marrow, okay? And as your antibodies go down, your T cells go up, and they circulate. And they're always shaking hands with any cell in your body going infected, not infected. And you have that rapid response. Again, this is why kids do so well. Don't panic over your antibody levels. Just know that if you've had COVID and you've documented it, and this is where I worry about, this whole political documentation of immunity, because you got to understand lab medicine, and they set the bottom end of that antibody level in the middle of a pandemic, so that bottom level isn't low enough yet. Usually it takes 2 to 3 years to validate a panel like that. So that's why if they're going to use, quote, immune passports, and they should use no passports and just let you be a human being, you got to really question scientifically what they're doing, okay? Next, please. All right, the vaccines, they do not prevent acquisition, they do not prevent transmission, disease, nor death. So I've run out of time because Dr. Nolte is here, and I could go on for hours, but I won't. And we'll do some Q&A later. Thank you.
I wanted to let you guys know we're running overtime, and so what we're going to alter the lunch speak a little bit. We're going to have Dr. Lee Yang talk at lunchtime for 30 minutes or so, and then we'll have our question answer at that time. Anybody that's here is welcome to stay for the afternoon session if you'd like to. As you can see, we've just scratched the surface on this. These guys have a wealth of information they'd love to share with you. So, anyway.